Because my family, when we would have disagreements, we didn't really resolve conflict. We just walk out the door on each other, slam down the phone, and we just didn't want to talk about it. So when we got married, I was afraid to say anything to you if I was upset, because I thought Robert's going to walk out on me. And I don't know if he's going to come back, because that's what my family did. So we did 2 years of premarital counseling. You can read about that in our book, Tandem. And we came up with rules of engagement. Like if we are in a heated conversation, we'll say to each other, honey, I love you. I need a timeout right now. I'll be back at such and such time. And we honor that. Yeah. That way it makes my anxiety come down, because I know he's coming back. I know he loves me, and that we're going to talk about it when we're in a little bit calmer situation.
When you're able to create that environment where it's safe to talk, raise things, and not afraid that it's going to turn into a big heated issue, or at least have the tools to understand how to kind of bring the temperature down. Because there's still times when the temperature goes up in our discussions, but we've just, over the years, we've gotten better. But the tools are basically like, one is when we're in the kind of caught in this cycle of insanity where we're just, throwing stuff at each other. I mean, not literally, but, words, and we're just not getting anywhere. We're all saying the same things in a, louder and slower or whatever, right? We're not going anywhere. And so a lot of times we'll just have to call a timeout and ask the other person, what do you need from me? It means I need you to understand. Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you understand what I'm feeling and why I feel this way, right? And even just that alone, when you're able to empathize and understand your spouse, then the resolution to the issue, the problem actually comes after that. I feel like I'm admitting guilt or wrong or whatever. And that makes a great bottle of wine and a great marriage is oxygen. To allow things to release toxicities. How does that relate to marriage? Let's see how I can do this. Let's connect the dots here. One of the things that creates toxicity in a marriage is a lot of unresolved conflict. And we just keep sweeping things under the rug. It's just stored basically in the bottle.
Ready to pop at any moment.
I get upset because I did something or said something, but that wasn't really why you're upset. Subconsciously, it's really because of all the years sometimes of unresolved issues. And so you got to air it out by addressing the issues.
Because there's so much toxins that build up in your body when you hold all that stuff in. Let me tell you, I can tell you firsthand that one. And it's hard on your relationship as well, because you just keep stuffing and trying to ignore things. And we have all these walls, and it's just really challenging.
Thriving in Tandem. It's a podcast for you, the married entrepreneur that wants to win in business and marriage at the same time.
Welcome to Thriving in Tandem.
Hello and welcome back to Thriving in Tandem.
Hi, Tandem family.
Hey, we got a very interesting episode. Let's going to see how this rolls. But we're kind of keeping on our, we just got back from Italy a month ago, and we're still kind of on the high, aren't we, honey?
It was our dream vacation, and it was fabulous.
And so, in fact, we were just on a podcast yesterday, and the host, she grew up in Italy, and she just got back from Italy as well. She left like right after we got back. And so anyways, so that's fresh in our mind. We're also planning a wine pairing dinner for next month, finalizing that.
No, it's not in Italy, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's here in Pasadena. But hey, that brings up a good point is, we want to, if you think there's an appetite for this in where you live, there's some other married business owners that need to get out and have fun, call us. We'll come out, set up a wine pairing dinner, and just have a lot of fun. Right. So anyways,
we would love to meet you in person.
So anyways, I just start thinking, especially as we were visiting these different wineries in Italy, that, there's a lot of parallels to building a great marriage, just like producing a great bottle of wine. And so we thought, hey, let's kind of dig into this. Let's have a little fun. One, we both enjoy wine, and especially we just got back from Italy. And
yes, we did eat a lot, you guys.
And just looking at the care, what you see in a bottle or taste in the bottle is one thing, but you look at the care and patience that they do throughout the year to be able to produce some good grapes that eventually turns into good wine. It's an art as well as a science. And so anyways, let's dig into this. Okay, ready, honey? So we're going to talk about the parallels of what makes a good wine also, in principle, makes a great marriage. And so the first one, which is very important, is patience.
Oh, I love it when you're patient with me, honey.
Yeah, I have a lot of patience. And so patience, the how the wine, when you produce a good bottle of wine, a good vintage, under the right conditions, and you store it properly, and you have patience, over the years, it just gets better. Now you hear that term, right? Wine gets better with age. Not all, because sometimes if the temperature in a cellar or wherever you're storing wine gets too hot over a period of time, it can spoil the wine. But under the right conditions, the right level of humidity or lack of humidity and temperature and just consistency in that temperature and all that, and being in a dark place with patience, you'll be rewarded with what started out as a good bottle could become a great bottle 15, 10, 5, 10, 15, 20 years later. And so just like I would say, like marriage, under the right conditions, we could have a great marriage. And patience is definitely one of those. Right, honey?
Yes. I love it when you're patient, honey.
What about you?
I'm patient when you say.
Yes, you are. And one of the things I remember early on in our relationship, actually when we were dating, I learned it pretty quick. I probably learned this even before our first date.
Oh, you're
Definitely
doing
on our
your
first
sales
date.
techniques on me.
I wasn't too of a sales technique, but I definitely learned early on in our relationship, probably the first date, is that you definitely can't push Kaylee to make a decision or push to even divulge certain information. Anyways, I had to be patient, right? Patient. And even like our first kiss, or not our first kiss, when I first told you I love you, I knew that she would probably not know how to respond. She won't want to say I love you back, most likely. So basically what I did was I said, honey, so we were probably dating about 3 months at that time. I said, I got something to tell you, but I don't expect you to respond. So I kind of let her off the hook and I just told her that I loved her. And then how'd you respond, honey?
I don't think I said anything. I know I didn't say thank you. Well, it's because I've heard people say that. Like someone they're dating will say, I love you. And the other person says back, thank you.
Yeah, I don't recall what you said back, but it definitely wasn't I love you.
No, I didn't say that.
Which, things getting fuzzy here. And I don't think you really said thank you, but
no, I didn't say
you said because you had some kind of response. But anyways, all that to say was I had patience that in good time she'll respond, and she eventually did. Right?
Yeah, because I was getting ready to go on a cruise with my girlfriends, and I thought, my gosh, what if something happens and I didn't tell him I loved him before I left? What if I didn't see him again? And I'm like, I don't want to bring it up. What am I going to do? I kind of have myself in a predicament. I felt like, fortunately, you said it again. And then when you said it the second time before I left on my trip, then I said it back.
Oh, it was before the trip? I thought it was after you got back.
Well,
but
that could have been then.
Yeah, so I was rewarded with that patience, and I didn't press her. I think if I have that attitude, so like whenever we're making a decision, or even if we get into disagreement, and we want to, like sometimes one spouse wants to resolve it faster than the other, but another spouse needs time to think. And depending on the situation, sometimes Kaylee needs more time to think. Sometimes I need more time to think. But we have to be patient with each other.
Well, and I think people process differently. I know, like in my family, people had forced decisions on me and forced me to do things as a child. And so then when I start feeling that pressure, then I kind of back away like, okay, I don't like this feeling.
Yeah. So patience is huge. Sometimes I've heard, a number of times over the past of the last month or so, hearing some spouses getting impatient with their spouse because they're not maybe changing the way it was, which is always a dangerous thing, not changing or making a decision or whatever, right? They became impatient. There's a line, right? We ultimately have to make a decision. We can't be just kicking a can down. Like sometimes when we get into conflict, one person is not needing time to think. Sometimes they just don't want to deal with it. So that's a little different, right? We have to come to resolution, especially when in disagreement or something. We do have to come to resolution. But we do have to allow that time for the other person to process. For us, we'll come up with, okay, when do we come back and circle back around and talk about this, right?
Well, and we give it a time and a date because we are specific about when that is, and then we honor that.
Yeah.
So we can come back and revisit it again.
And even like when I had the idea about starting a podcast.
Oh.
I have to be patient with my wife.
Yes. I thought, are you crazy? Why are you asking me this?
That was pretty good. And I was patient, right? I said,
yes.
Again, especially for things like this, to be in front of stages, or, this isn't really a stage, but you're putting yourself out there. Mm-hmm. And I had a feeling she was going to say no. And so, but I just wanted to plant the seed, basically. So I wasn't going to push it. So when she said no, I said, hey, honey, what do you think about starting a podcast? She said no right away.
I said,
So
why are you even asking me this? You know,
I
I'm going to say no.
said, okay. But then a month or two later, I said, hey, why don't we, do a couple of video shorts, like little short videos for social media.
And I wasn't really thrilled about that either.
But she said yes. And, it was a little clumsy in the beginning, which you would think. But then we both got comfortable with it. And then eventually, then Kaylee came back to me and said, okay, let's do the podcast. So you kind of, plant the seed, but don't get offended if they say no. But just be patient with it. And, in your own time, right? You just kind of keep cultivating an environment that will allow the person the time to think, but then also the environment to feel safe when they come back, which leads to the second point.
Well, and I was going to say, you gave me that room and that space to think about it and come to my own conclusion. And I didn't feel forced or pushed or anything. And so that really helped me a lot.
Yeah. And so that leads to the second point I want to talk about is environment. In the right environment and growing conditions, you can turn, a grape like let's say Cabernet Sauvignon. Different grapes for different wines prefer different types of environment, from soil to weather, right? And all those things. All those factors play into a part of how well you can produce a great bottle of wine.
Mhm.
And so sometimes in the same area, let's say, we're relatively close to Napa. That's a, world renowned region for wine. And you have the same grape, right? Same grapevines, same soil, but the weather that year, lack of rain or a lot of rain or whatever, can change the taste and the quality of the wine that year or the vintage that year. So environment is huge. And so in the right environment, you can even when the weather is going to be different from year to year, which it can be slightly different, right? Some years are hotter than others, or some years, you get more rain than others. Some years you get a little more frost than others too. But it's interesting that if you're able to still, with the winemakers, if they can, a lot of times they can take even bad weather and produce a good vintage just by determining whether they maybe should pick earlier than normal. So even they can turn a bad weather situation and use it to their advantage. Because I've seen so many wines, like a lot of times people talk about the perfect growing conditions and it's a great vintage. But then there's other years where, oh my gosh, they didn't have a lot of rain, but what they say is, but it created more intense fruit in the flavor of the wine. So, but they had to adjust how they or when they even harvested. And so anyways, the right environment can make or break a wine, just like I was talking about, cellaring the wine, right? And so in a marriage, how do we create the right environment to build that trust, as I was kind of alluding to be able to talk about anything?
I would say cultivating the environment is really important, and feeling safe. That's part of why I did the podcast, because I felt safe with you. We talked about it. You said you would support me and help me in any way that I might need. You told me that being on a podcast, having your own, is totally different than speaking in front of thousands of people. And I found that to be true. And I think too, cultivating the environment at work for your employees so they feel safe, so they can come with you when they have problems or issues, or maybe they have a better idea of doing things, but you've already developed that safety net for them where they feel like they can come and talk about things.
Yeah. So part of that, especially when you're talking about a marriage or, business, anywhere where you want to have open and honest communication, right? It's very important to grow a team, to build really a strong relationship as husband and wife, with your kids. And so part of it, you have to make sure you cultivate that environment of trust. And what does that look like? Well, one is, whenever couples have a hard time resolving issues and conflict, it's usually one's usually the pursuer and one is the retreater, right? And I think in our case, the way we're wired, we're kind of both retreaters, but yet I think in our relationship in general, you're more to be the pursuer. You want to resolve issues. I'm more just going to retreat. So we had to cultivate that trust in which, well, it goes both ways, where both of us feel safe to raise an issue.
And that just doesn't happen out of the clear blue sky. It's something you have to work on, all the time, building that safe place.
Yeah, just like in wine. I mean, the soil's the soil, but the way they till the soil, right, and the way they even, um, for lack of a better term, that's not the right, but trim, or what do you call that? Prune the vines, right? So it's not just you plant it and let it grow, right? There's additional work that's always involved to produce a good wine. So just like a good marriage, and a good team, to cultivate that trust, it takes work. One is, one of the things I had to learn early on, what you told me was don't use sarcasm because it hurts. You grow up in a family that used sarcasm.
And they meant it, even though they said they were kidding, they meant it.
And there was a lot of barbs behind that, right? And so, for me, in the middle of a disagreement, if I'm to throw out sarcasm, it's going to shut everything down. It's going to make things really bad.
And it's going to wound my heart even more.
So that had to be off the table, right? In when we develop our rules of engagement, that sarcasm was off the table. You do allow me to do it with the guys.
Oh, yeah.
Which I do.
Have at it with them.
One of my friends on Mastermind, he's Mr. Sarcastic. He's proud of the fact that he's sarcastic.
God bless his wife.
But anyways, so those kind of things. So how do you cultivate that environment of trust is basically you got to disallow or take off the table anything that can trigger your spouse.
And another example of that with our rules of engagement is my family, when we would have disagreements, we didn't really resolve conflict. We just walk out the door on each other, slam down the phone, and we just didn't want to talk about it. So when we got married, I was afraid to say anything to you if I was upset, because I thought Robert's going to walk out on me. And I don't know if he's going to come back, because that's what my family did. So we did 2 years of premarital counseling. You can read about that in our book, Tandem. And we came up with rules of engagement that if we are in a heated conversation, we'll say to each other, honey, I love you. I need a timeout right now. I'll be back at such and such time. And we honor that. Yeah. That way it makes my anxiety come down, because I know he's coming back. I know he loves me, and that we're going to talk about it when we're in a little bit calmer situation.
Yeah. And so when you're able to create that environment where it's safe to raise things, and not afraid that it's going to turn into a big heated issue, or at least have the tools to understand how to kind of bring the temperature down. Because there's still times when the temperature goes up in our discussions, but we've just, over the years, we've gotten better. But the tools are basically like, one is when we're in the kind of caught in this cycle of insanity where we're just, throwing stuff at each other. I mean, not literally, but, words, and we're just not getting anywhere. We're all saying the same things in a, louder and slower or whatever, right? We're not going anywhere. And so a lot of times we'll just have to call a timeout and ask the other person, what do you need from me? Clearly this isn't going anywhere. What do you need from me? And that brings the temperature down, because it makes the other person think, what do I need? Like, we're just caught in this argument, but what do I need? Do I need you to...
I just want to win the argument. That's all I want. I just want to dig my heels in.
You need to listen to me. And so sometimes listening doesn't mean that you have to agree. It just means I need you to understand. Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you understand what I'm feeling and why I feel this way? Right. And even just that alone, when you're able to empathize and understand your spouse, then the resolution to the issue, the problem, actually comes after that.
Yeah, because sometimes I just want to be heard. I don't know if you necessarily have to agree with me, but I just want to know that you understand what I'm saying.
And that's the fear, I think, probably not just guys. I think it's both sexes.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's the fear, is when you are coming to agreement with your spouse about why they feel the way they feel, whatever, you kind of feel like I'm admitting guilt or wrong or whatever. And that's not the case at all. It's just understanding is not about agreeing what they say or not. It's really about agreeing that they feel upset or sad or whatever. And things I've said or done has kind of triggered that for her or him. And then you understand that. And then I said, oh, okay, I get it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you feel that way. I made you feel that way. And once you come into that understanding, then you can start to resolve the issue, because the temperature comes down, right? The third thing that makes a great bottle of wine and a great marriage is oxygen.
Ooh, I think we all need that, right?
When you allow the wine to breathe, when you first open up the bottle, especially the more bold wines like a Zinfandel, Merlot, Cabernet, or whatever, Bordeaux, that you want to give it time to breathe. This also comes to patience. Instead of just drinking it right away, now I'll always pour a little taste, right? Just taste it. But I'll let the bottle breathe and let it oxygenate. Now, a lot of people, and I was probably one of those, like, oh, that's so foo-foo. Just wine snobs and all that. And it's interesting if you do a taste test of when you open the bottle versus waiting a half hour to sometimes an hour, sometimes longer, especially if the bottle's been aged quite a bit, 10, 20 years, that the wine does get better the more you allow it to breathe. And what I learned is because there's a lot of basic toxins that build up, basically, as the bottle's been sitting in for years. And so when you let the bottle or the glass of wine breathe, it actually allows those things to get released. So a lot of times there'll be a lot of, especially like cabs and merlots, they'll have tannins, and the tannins are basically, the symptom is you get that drying, puckering effect of your mouth. But the longer you allow it to breathe, those tannins start to calm down, and you don't get that as much. Now, then you can taste the fruit a lot more. And so, anyways, allowing time to breathe basically allow things to release toxicities. How does that relate to marriage? Let's see how I can do this. Let's connect the dots here. One of the things that creates toxicity in a marriage is a lot of unresolved conflict. And we just keep sweeping things under the rug, under the rug, under the rug. It's just stored basically in the bottle.
Ready to pop at any moment.
It's going to pop any moment, right? So resolving the issues creates that oxygen that allows that toxicity to escape, right? Because when you resolve the issue, then it's no longer a problem. And we feel more connected and more intimate with your spouse, right? But when you have all these layers of problems that have not been resolved, we haven't aired it out, so to speak, then resentment sets in. What else?
You're walking on eggshells, like a mine's about to go off at any minute, because you never know what's
going to set you up.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is that it could be the smallest mundane issue that sets you off, but it's really a trigger because of all the other unresolved issues that's come outside. So it's usually not the issue at hand. You get upset because I did something or said something, but that wasn't really why you're upset. Subconsciously, it's really because of all the years sometimes of unresolved issues. And so you got to air it out by addressing the issues.
Because there's so much toxins that build up in your body when you hold all that stuff in. Let me tell you, I can tell you firsthand that one. And it's hard on your relationship as well, because you just keep stuffing and trying to ignore things. And we have all these walls, and it's just really challenging.
Yeah. So that oxygen, you got to air it. You got to air it out. And also, too, even in the midst of an argument or disagreement, breathe instead of just going at each other. I was talking to the friends I was having coffee with this morning. I was kind of talking about this episode we're going to do, and he brought this up. It's sometimes like if his wife is going to bring up something, he's got to breathe. And I said, oh yeah, that's what we do. Like whenever Kaylee is going to raise an issue with me that she might feel is kind of touchy, what do you do, or what do you say?
I say, honey, I have something I needed to speak with you about. Can you guard your heart?
And so that's a signal to me that this could sting, but she doesn't mean it in a mean way, but we just need to air this out a little bit.
And we don't catch each other off guard, because there's nothing worse, at least for me, than you catch me off guard. I'm in the middle of something else and you're upset and you come in, and I'm not in that frame of mind to deal with that.
So I will literally breathe. Right? I close my eyes and I take some deep breaths. I'm saying to myself, don't react, don't react, don't react. Right?
Well, and that's so healthy for your body. When you do deep breathing, it calms your nervous system down. You're able to think clearer.
So it was funny when Chris brought that up this morning. I was like, oh yeah, that's what I do. When Kaylee brings something up, like I breathe. It works. It works. I have to get to the right frame of mind, so I just don't react to her. And that's important. Again, this goes back to creating that culture, that environment, that it's safe to bring things up, right? So the last point I want to bring up, the last parallel between a good wine and a great marriage, are that blends are usually very incredible wines. So what does that mean? Especially if you're not, like, I know a lot of you aren't wine drinkers or just, don't really care, but you're getting a little bit of an education on wine. So blends. So a lot of times, some of the best wines like Bordeaux's and even Cabs or Super Tuscans from Italy, they're usually a blend of 3 to sometimes 5 grapes, 5 different grape varietals: Cabernet, the Syrah, the Merlot, the Petit Syrah, those kind of things, right? And they tend to be much more what we call in the wine world approachable. Like sometimes Cabernet Sauvignon, that Cabernet grape, those grapes then the wines are very bold, very rich, and sometimes too much to drink, just sitting there and sipping and drinking. And so the Cabernet grape might be the core grape that they're blending around with, like say a Bordeaux, but they're usually adding 3 to 4 other grapes around it to kind of soften the wine and make it approachable and easier to drink right now, instead of having to wait 5 to 10 years to be able to drink it. Because there's some wines, especially back in the day, especially Cabernet Sauvignons, where you couldn't drink it right. It was just too much. You had to let it
It's too bold.
age to let it mellow out. over time. So, but with the blends, you have grapes that are a little bit softer, a little bit more, less body. That makes the wine much more approachable, and you can drink it right now, and they're great. So, what does that have to do with marriage? Sometimes, let's face it, you might be cool, you might be good, but maybe a little too much. And your spouse, your wife, your husband just smooths you out a little bit more, right? Makes you a little bit more approachable. Sometimes you ever go to dinner, you meet some couples, and definitely one of the spouses could definitely be a really lot too much. Like either they're too over the top, boisterous, yada, 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 right? And the wife or the husband just tends to mellow them out a little bit, right? They make it as a couple, they're much more approachable than if it was just the wife. You just were trying to hang out with the husband or the wife, right? The ones that a little bit too much. But also too, just the way you think, your process, your personalities, but even your work ethics and all that kind of stuff. Where especially if you're a husband and wife team like we are, where I might be good by myself, but I'm great with Kaylee.
Oh, that's sweet.
Right? I mean, we're just better together. And I remember noticing when after I left corporate and started doing consulting, full time, started getting invited to places, to trips. And then kind of early on, almost immediately, I mean, you would go with me. A lot of times they're inviting both of us anyway. But I noticed that the dynamic between myself and, whoever's there in the audience or
that you're speaking
at a meeting
to
or whatever, the dynamic was different in a better way when Kaylee was there than if I was just there by myself. Because I've had, opportunities when I was by myself, and I still do every now and then, but I noticed the dynamic is much better when you're there. And I think one of the areas, I think it was Bozeman, Montana, when I noticed this. And part of it is, especially when you're more of a smaller community, that are much more family oriented. So being there as husband and wife, I think creates a deeper level of trust. So yeah, I can be good by myself, but we're a lot better if we're together. And I think going in as husband and wife, I do think just in general, not even just in these smaller communities, but just in general, I think there is a deeper level of trust. I think people think they get to know you a little bit better because they see your better half with you. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think we can complement each other just in general, but I think even when we're together, just out and about, networking, whatever, is better. So anyways, I think you have to appreciate each other's gifts and work with it and just become a great blend.
Well, and I think too, enjoy your complementary gifts because we do have a lot in common, but we're not, we have different personalities and you and I, and we have different gifts and strengths. So, I remember one time, you're very detailed. I'm more creative and spontaneous. You'd be working on stuff and you're like, honey, this has got to be detailed. Or if we're doing book work, he's like, it's got to be perfect. It's got to be, what I mean? We're dealing with numbers.
Bookwork meaning accounting.
Yes. And I'm like, well, I'm just creative. I just want to make it pretty.
You can't just make stuff up.
I know. Well, I was doing my best, but it wasn't my gifting. Yeah. And so it created conflict between the two of us. So we ended up moving that around. So I'm no longer doing that. All that to say is he's very detailed. It was kind of irritating, especially when I was doing the accounting. But now I embrace it because sometimes I just am working on things and it needs to be detailed. It needs to be right. So I'm like, honey, can you help me, please? Yes. And he looks it over and he cleans it up, tidies it up, and we're good to go.
Yeah, so learning to really work with each other's strengths so that you can work well together, blend well together, since we're talking about blending wines, but blending well together. You got to know the right mix, especially in the blends, in the wine blend, you got to know the right mix. Too much or too little of one grape can really throw off the blend. And so just like when you're working with each other, right? I think if we step on each other's toes, I mean, that just makes things really bad. So how do we have the right blend of allowing, making sure each other's gifts and their strengths shine and not have you doing something that you're not as gifted or enjoy, right? And that'll just spoil the blend.
It just causes conflict between us.
So anyways, so those are the four, I guess, parallels of what goes into making a good bottle of wine also makes a great marriage. So what do you think, honey?
I love it. And I think too, the people, the couples that I see that can resolve conflict, oh my gosh, they seem like they're so much more resilient and they can just keep going forward and they don't get stuck.
Yeah, you don't get stuck. Exactly.
Like, oh my gosh, we've been trying to make this decision for the last 20 years and haven't been able to do that. And so I don't see that happening with people that can resolve conflict and keeps the marriage moving forward and the business. So it's a win-win.
Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and especially if you're a wine lover or drink wine, then you'll get it. But even hopefully, even if you're not a wine drinker, then you'll understand the parallels that'll hit home. So, anyways, thank you for listening to Thriving in Tandem. If you were, I'm sure you were blessed by this, so go ahead and share this with another married entrepreneur who needs to hear this. And until next week,
Ching ching.
God bless.
Thank you for listening to the Thriving in Tandem podcast. Please visit our website, marriedentrepreneur.co, for a variety of free resources to help your marriage and business succeed.
And feel free to leave us a review and share this episode with another married entrepreneur. That would mean so much to us.
See you next week.